Slinky little beast!
Oh, hell yeah.
Hell yeah! Hell yeah! Hell yeah! Hell yeah! Hell yeah!
Hey, welcome back, Truth Seekers. Got a very special guest here with you today. Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably recognize this gentleman. He is a gentleman and a scholar. He's also a publisher and a filmmaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dinesh D'Souza. Hi, Dinesh.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, but you're back in Arizona. I just recently learned you actually landed in Patagonia, Arizona, when you came from India. Is that true?
Oh, that was in the fall of 1978. I was 17 years old, and I came as an exchange student. I lived in southern Arizona. I went to public school for a year, and then I never went home.
I had no idea. I just learned that today. So welcome. Good to have you back home.
It's great to be here.
So your latest book is called The Big Lie. For anyone who hasn't yet read it, give us the 30-second synopsis. Why did you write it, and what is it?
Well, The Big Lie is it's sort of deconstruction of the idea that fascism, Nazism, are phenomena of the right. Ever since Trump's election, the left has sort of pivoted. They haven't abandoned the race card, their old faithful, but they've sort of incorporated into a fascism card. And they're peddling a lie that's been around long before Trump. It goes back to World War II. This idea that sort of Trump is a fascist, the GOP, the Republicans, the conservatives were the neo-Nazi party. All of this is based on this notion that fascism is right-wing. And so the book kind of systematically takes that on. It takes it on historically, ideologically, tactically, and I think I show that on every count, fascism has always been on the left, was recognized to be on the left, is on the left now, but the left covers that up.
One of the things I thought you did brilliantly in the book is you talk about how, let's say if you want to learn about Christianity, you can talk to modern factions of Christianity to learn more about it, but what you ought to do is go back to the originators, right? Talk about the prophets and apostles. What did they do? What did they believe? Who were they? You do that in this book. So let's talk about ideologically, who was Giovanni Gentile and how come I never learned about him in school?
Yeah, so isn't it strange? I mean, if someone said, who's the philosopher of fascism? We know. We don't know. But if we said who's the philosopher of Marxism, we know it's Marx. Right. Who's the philosopher of capitalism? We know it's Adam Smith. So Gentile was Mussolini's Minister of Education. And it's important to realize Mussolini was the first fascist. He was the guy who started the first fascist regime in the world. And Mussolini himself acknowledged, he goes, Gentile paved the way. He paved the way for guys like me, Mussolini, who wanted to go that way. And it's very clear, one reason we don't know about Gentile is his philosophy, when you look at it, is centralized power. Basically, he argues that the individual is meaningless. The individual is kind of like a cell in the body. The state is the body. And so the individuals don't have rights any more than cells have rights. Cells are valuable to the degree that they contribute to the body as a whole. And similarly, individuals are important only to the degree that they serve the state. Now think about this. This is the statist ideology of government control of the economy, of your life. In fact, total control. Mussolini was literally a totalitarian, and for him, totalitarianism was a positive because it implied total state regulation of everything. And now look, hey, that doesn't sound to me like the platform of the Republican Party. It doesn't sound to me like Trump. This is why the left wants to bury Gentile. He'd be a very powerful philosopher on their side if they had acknowledged him, but they can't because he's got the taint of fascism, which would then spread to them.
You actually referenced some books where introspective or honest leftists admit some of the mistakes with the ideology, and they mentioned his name. They also mentioned someone, I know I'm going to butcher the name, George Sorel, another fascinating character. Why is he important in the ideology?
He's important because fascism grew out of the crisis of Marxism. Now, the crisis of Marxism is the idea, Marx had predicted that there would be communist revolutions breaking out all over the world.
Right.
And when this didn't happen, really smart Marxists began to scratch their heads and go, why not? Think of it, from Marx's day till now, in no country in the world ever has the proletariat, the working class, actually revolted against their employers and overthrown them. That's never happened. And so the smart Marxists in the late 19th century, the early 20th century, they began to scratch their head and said, maybe the proletariat is too sleepy. Maybe they're actually too fat and happy. Maybe they've been bought off by the capitalists. So right. The revolution is not going to be conducted by them. It has to be conducted for them. In other words, we need, now I'm using modern vocabulary, we need community activists to stoke up the proletariat. Now, George Sorel was sort of the prophet of that. He was the prophet of consciousness raising. Consciousness raising to create what he literally called an orgy of violence against the ruling powers. And the left has had to embrace some version of Sorel. Alinsky, for example, is in that Sorelian tradition, where Alinsky doesn't count on revolution to occur. Remember, Marx didn't call for revolution. Marx predicted it. Marx said it's a scientific law of history.
It will happen.
It will happen. We don't have to do anything. It's going to happen by itself,
Right.
so to speak. And so Sorel and these guys are now a tradition on the left where even today, look at all these groups always consciousness raising. They're trying to replace false consciousness with true consciousness as they see it. Sorel is in that tradition.
So I want to ask you about the corporate rebranding of the fascist movement, but since you brought up consciousness raising, I got to be honest, the NFL thing had just popped up. We can talk about some current culture, and I get in arguments with people, and we discuss what's really happening here. Are we upset about the flag? Are we upset the NFL owners are as dumb as the players? And as I read your book, the light bulb went off, consciousness raising. I read that and thought, Saul Alinsky, as you've noted, said the issue is never the issue. Right? It's not. It's a distraction from the real issue. And I look at the NFL and say, the issue is not the issue. It's not the flag. It's not the Constitution. It's that we are meant to care more about the progressive narrative than we are about the actual, than the game of football. And you have these people sacrificing what they've worked their entire lives for to make a case that you can argue doesn't actually help anyone. It distracts them from getting to the Hall of Fame, distracts the fans of the NFL from enjoying the game. Is that what you mean by consciousness?
Well, right. It doesn't help those two groups. It helps a third group, which actually has no interest in football.
Right.
I mean, the left has been dominant in academia, in the media, in Hollywood, and you think that would make them happy. They'd be content. But no, even in sports, which would seem to be neutral, guys running up and down a field, they want to, in a sense, colonize that too. And this is actually what the Nazis call Gleichschaltung. Gleichschaltung means coordination. It really means nobody in the society is allowed to march out of lockstep. We have to get everybody to bow down, to genuflect, to submit to the prevailing fascist ideology. And so the left-wing fascists of today are enforcing it in sports. Now, why are they doing it? Why is it a big deal to them? Why the national anthem? Why the Confederate statues? Well, the answer is this. Most of the crimes that they're complaining about were done by the Democratic Party. Slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, the Ku Klux Klan, racial terrorism. The Democratic Party was deeply embroiled in all of these. I mean, actively managing them. Now, they've never admitted that. They've never apologized for it. They've never taken responsibility for it.
No reparations.
No reparations. So for 100 years, since the end of the Civil War, the Democrats initially, and then the progressives, have been trying to take the crimes of the Democratic Party and stick them on the South or on America. So the South, that's the Confederate statues. America, that's the national anthem. In both cases, the big lie is at work. The big lie is take the crimes that we did, the left, project them onto someone else, and make them bear the guilt for it, and then we present ourselves as the cure. So the very guys who have poisoned the water are showing up as the water commissioner.
So I want to go a little off the book here because there's a lot of my audience, spiritually woke, Christian audience, when I read it, what I think about is the battle that's been going on since the beginning, right? The spiritual battle between who controls your agency, who do you surrender that agency to, and what do you get in return? So when I read it, I think a lot about the big lie and the source of that, which is the big liar, right? It started with a rebellion. There were people cast out of the presence of perfection. What did they do? What did they believe? Who deceived them? What did they think they were getting in return for that? And ultimately, what were they promised? And usually the promise is something that those people don't have the power to deliver unless the revolution is successful. You agree or disagree with my thesis? Because I think the source of the big lies are that someone wants to control you. Someone doesn't want to allow you to use your agency to improve your own life. You're not capable of doing that on your own.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that you have, at the outer layer of American politics, you have the political sphere. And then underneath it is the moral sphere, the sphere of right and wrong. And underneath that is the spiritual sphere. So if you look, for example, at Satan, and I'm now looking at Satan as described by Milton in Paradise Lost. Satan basically starts with a lie. He says, God didn't create me. He goes, I'm self-created. I created myself. And now think about this. Think of how that idea is, even with us now, so powerful behind this idea. I create my own identity. I get to say who I am. No outside force, not even nature, can trump my assertion of who I am. We see that today in identity politics. And it's rooted in this notion that there's no objective reality, there's no objective truth, and there's no creator who had a plan for the universe. There's no providence. So, yes, I mean, at the deepest level, these are spiritual conflicts. And I think recognizing them makes us, tougher, you may say, soldiers in this culture.
Outstanding. I've read the book. It's fantastic. One of your best. We've got a few here. These are the ones that I've gotten back from lending out. Obviously, some are missing, but I wish you the best of luck, and I'm really curious to find out. I know they're going to criticize you and insult you, but like Hillary's America, probably not be able to refute anything you said in this book, so I look forward to hearing more down the road.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Oh.